opposed to Assad. His omission from the Security Council resolution signals a softening stance and a potential diplomatic turning point. The Obama administration's quietly backed off its public insistence that Assad must go, claiming it's no longer seeking regime change in Syria. Now, an explosive new report says U.S. military leadership and the Joint Chiefs of Staff has held that view all along and has taken secret steps to move U.S. policy in that direction. According to award-winning veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, the Joint Chiefs of Staff has tacitly aided the Assad regime to help it defeat radical jihadists. Hersh reports the Joint Chiefs sent intelligence via Russia, Germany, and Israel on the understanding it would be transmitted to help Assad push back Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State. Hersh also claims the military even undermined a U.S. effort to arm Syrian rebels in a bid to prove to Assad it was serious about helping him fight their common enemies. At the Joint Chiefs' behest, a CIA weapons shipment to the Syrian opposition was allegedly downgraded to include obsolete weapons. Hersh says the Joint Chiefs' maneuvering was rooted in several concerns, including the U.S. arming of unvetted Syrian rebels with jihadist ties. A belief the administration was overly focused on confronting Assad's ally in Moscow, and anger the White House was unwilling to confront Turkey and Saudi Arabia over their support of extremist groups in Syria. Hersh's report in the London Review of Books follows his controversial story in May challenging the Obama administration's account of the killing of Osama bin Laden. Like that story, his latest piece relies heavily on a single source described as a former senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs. And while critics have dismissed both stories as conspiracy theories, it turns out that key aspects of the bin Laden report have since been corroborated. After the bin Laden story came out, U.S. and Pakistani intelligence sources confirmed Hersh's reporting that the U.S. discovered bin Laden's location when a Pakistani officer told the CIA, and that the Pakistani government knew all along where bin Laden was hiding. For more, we're joined by Seymour Hersh. He won the Pulitzer Prize for exposing the 1968 My Lai massacre in Vietnam, when U.S. forces killed hundreds of civilians. In 2004, Sy Hersh broke the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal. His latest piece in the London Review of Books is headlined Military to Military, U.S. Intelligence Sharing in the Syrian War. Hersh is working on a study of Dick Cheney's vice presidency. We welcome you back to Democracy Now!, Sy Hersh. Why don't you lay out this very controversial report that you have just published in the London Review of Books? What did you find?
Well, it began actually, as I wrote, with a very serious, extensive assessment of our policy that was completed by June, let's say by middle of 2013, 2.5 years ago. It was a study done by the Joint Chiefs and the Defense Intelligence Agency that came to three sort of conclusions that may seem obvious now, but were pretty interesting then. One is that they said Assad must stay, at least through the resolution of the war, because as we saw in Libya, once you get rid of a leader like Gaddafi, same in you can argue in Iraq with the demise of Saddam Hussein, chaos ensues. The second, so that was an issue that the point being elections at some point, certainly, but for the short term, while we're still fighting, he has to stay. And that wasn't the American position then. And I would argue with you, I still think the American position is very muddled, although they have seemed to soften it. Secondly, the other point they made is that their investigation showed this notion of a moderate force just was a fiction, was just a fantasy, that most of the Free Syrian Army by the summer, by mid-2013, were in some sort of an understanding with al-Nusra, or as you put it, ISIL, the Islamic State. There was a lot of back and forth going, arms going into the Free Syrian Army, and other moderates were being peddled, sold, or transferred to the more extremist groups. And the third major finding was about Turkey. It said we simply have to deal with the problem. The Turkish government, led by Erdogan, had opened, basically, his borders were open, arms were flying. I'd written about that earlier for the London Review. The rat line, there were arms flying since 2012, covertly with the CIA support and the support of the American government. Arms are coming from Tripoli and other places, in Benghazi, in Libya, going into Turkey and then being moved across the line. And another interesting point is that a lot of Chinese dissidents, the Uyghurs, the Muslims Chinese that are being pretty much hounded by the Chinese, were also, another rat line existed. They were coming from China into Kazakhstan, into Turkey, and into Syria. So this was a serious finding. It was not the first time some of these points had been raised, and there was simply no echo once you pass this stuff on to the White House or into the other